So the other day, I interviewed some of the Conan Exiles dev team about the Age of Heroes and Conan in general. This was a fairly long and honestly pretty insightful interview about what the development of the game's artwork looks like, from concept art to designing armour and building sets all the way to its implementation in-game. We'll be talking to Sven, the lead concept artist on Conan, Kris, the art producer on Conan, and Andy from the community team is here too. They provided a really interesting peek into how things work on the art side of things in terms of how they design items, the way they work on producing the items we get in-game, and plenty more. So without any further ado, here is the long-form interview. Enjoy. Okay, so we are here with Kris and Sven. Kris, Sven, if you'd like to introduce yourselves and tell us your roles at Funcom.
Kris?
Sure. Why don't you go ahead, Sven?
All right, sure. Hi, my name is Sven Bybee. I am the lead concept artist on Conan Exiles. I primarily work with the in-house artists working on that project, as well as some outsource. But yeah, that's pretty much what I do.
I'm Chris Hammond. I'm the art producer on Conan Exiles. Been at Funcom for 11 years now. I've worked in the past on the MMOs, Anarchy Online, Age of Conan, and Secret World. Previously, I was an animator, and then I kind of made the transition over to production when I joined the Exiles team. So I've been doing that for a few years, I guess about 4 now, I think. I don't know, time flies. I think COVID was mixed in there, and it's hard to keep track. But yeah, that's pretty much what I do here.
So obviously, I think probably the best part to jump in at is Conan Exiles has been around for a while. And I think probably the internal process has changed quite a lot, especially moving into the Aegis system. So I suppose the best jumping off point is how has the transition into the Aegis system sort of facilitated your work in the art department, and how has it changed how you approach it?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll jump on that since Sven joined a little bit after we made that transition. But with the Age of Sorcery, that was a big expansion to the game that had been talked about for a long time. Players were it was highly anticipated, and so in addition to that, we transitioned away from the previous model we'd had in terms of the DLCs, the culture packs that we'd been doing previously, to more of an a la carte sort of shop model, as well as integrating a battle pass. And the intention there was to try to give players more content on kind of an ongoing basis in the base game, not just new DLC, but give people who are just playing the game more to do with each release. So that has trying to remember how many chapters we've done overall. We did 3 with Age of Sorcery, 4 with Age of War, and now we've just released the first chapter for Age of Heroes.
I think coming into the Aegis system in general, I feel like obviously the quality difference between something like Khitan and Numidian over the years was a big jump, but I feel like a big jump was also made coming into the Age of Sorcery. So coming now into the Age of Heroes, so far removed from the Age of Sorcery, how does the, I guess, stylizing process look like? What's the sort of the overall vibe, I guess, for the Age of Heroes?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk a little bit about kind of where we came from, and hand it off to Sven to talk about where we're headed, because he's really guiding that as we move forward. So, um, obviously, the base game was, I think it's 7 years old at this point. It started out just the Exiled Lands, and the core team in Oslo who made that uh, started doing the DLCs, but gradually kind of transitioned their focus bit by bit to other projects, and brought in other members of the company to other teams to kind of fill in as far as producing content goes. So there was the Lisbon team, ZPX. We did a lot of work on the later DLCs, especially um, building kits in particular. Kind of transitioned from the Oslo team to Lisbon over the course of the DLCs, and I worked with that team on the Numidian DLC, which was the last DLC release we did. Likewise, that team also kind of transitioned their focus onto other projects, at which point the North Carolina studio where we're located really took over, with support from other locations. But, here in North Carolina, we really kind of took over the transition to the MTX model with the ages. And so, we've to answer your question as far as like the progression, you know, the more you work with a project, the more comfortable you become with it. You become more comfortable with the tools. You start to be a little more ambitious with what you're trying to do. Early on, the building sets in particular, since you asked about them, were really kind of very strictly modular. They were more like just straight up reskins, rather than trying to do anything new or different. But with some of the DLCs, they started to, explore other kind of avenues. There was the Stables set, which was the addition of new and different pieces. The Vaulted Ceilings, I think, came with the Blood and Sand DLC with the Arena set. So they kind of piecemeal started adding new and different sort of pieces, and I feel like on our end, with the building sets that we put in the Bazaar, we pushed that even further, where we're trying to do even more new and compelling things rather than just sort of working within the constraints of that modular set.
Yeah, I think that progression, especially with the building sets, but I think even with the armor designs, is probably quite immediately impactful. I think you compare maybe some of the Khitan armors from the first DLC, which I still very much like, to, I don't know, something that's released recently, or even the reintroduction of Hyrcanian Warlord from Age of Conan.
Mhm.
I think that armor really stands out. I think the design stands out a lot as well. So, coming now into the Age of Heroes, how does the future look in terms of the overall, I guess, stylized vision? What's the sort of aesthetic we're aiming for?
Yeah, Sven, do you want to jump in?
Sure. How much can we actually talk about some of the stuff that we're working on right now? Yes, yeah, I've been working with the art team for about a little over a year now, and from my experience and what I've seen, one of the things that we've been doing, and it's just as Chris kind of pointed out, is trying to push a lot more of that cultural influence that a lot of the lore does have, and giving it that very unique flavor, and the visual development, which early on there was some cool stuff, but we've always felt like we can push this a little further, we can make this a little cooler, we can make this feel like that cultural flavor stronger. And so with a lot of the content that we have done since then, I've definitely tried to have a hand in that as well. That's pushing also the quality as well. And when it comes to those building pieces, like, I love that we do every now and then when we get working on a set, we're like, okay, can we get something new in here that is really going to make this different now? Can we push a few things? Can we push the silhouettes and the shapes? Can we make these feel a lot more different? Even though we are limited by a building system that's pretty rigid in the way it works, can we do more and just to even aesthetically represent these cultures better? And I love that we've been able to do that, and we continue to push those. And yeah, there's a couple coming up that we're working on and developing that have some new um, aspects to them that I'm excited to see. But we've been doing that, of course, with armors, the weapons, the different props, and things that players can purchase and enjoy. So just continuing to push that visual development. And there's, of course, a lot of the cultures as well that every now and then we get to, and we're like, we're going to have some of this. And I look and I'm like, oh, nobody's really done anything with this. So this is a blank slate, and we get to start, really developing that visual aspect of that culture almost from scratch. So it's been a lot of fun.
I think that actually segues quite nicely into something that I've always wondered about, which is there's a lot of cultures obviously that are really well documented throughout Howard's
hmm
entire body of work. But what is the process for a culture that's perhaps not as well documented? How do you approach something that you don't have a lot to work with initially?
Do you want to start off on that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, Yamatai is a good example of that. I don't think Howard even once mentioned it. It was kind of one of the pastiche sort of inventions. Um, so there wasn't a ton to work on, but feudal Japan is incredibly rich as far as what you can explore and implement in this world. The world of Conan is very there are guardrails in terms of what's appropriate and what's not. But at the same time, it's very kind of it's open in a lot of ways. Uh, he Howard, when he wrote, drew on actual cultures and their history to kind of piece together his prehistory, like pseudo history of these cultures. So even though they, in terms of the lore, predate these like real cultures, Howard was still drawing on them, and likewise we draw on them as well. And so we try to keep things sort of in that Bronze Age aesthetic, you know, uh, primitive cultures with some medieval stuff kind of mixed in there as well. If you read Hour of the Dragon, for instance, Howard talks about mail-clad soldiers on horseback with lances glinting in the sunlight and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's very, very medieval. But at the same time, because of the period of history that it's supposed to take place in, we try to keep things fairly primitive. So, when we're looking at something like Yamatai, like I said, we are drawing on feudal Japanese samurai sort of culture, or like the imperial uh, dynasties of the medieval period, and kind of trying to piece that together in something that visually fits with what is already in the game, but also like Sven said, bringing something new that hasn't been done yet in the game that's really compelling.
Yeah, I would repeat a little bit of what Chris said, especially with there's certain things about the different cultures that we draw on from inspiration that is very very recognizable. They are just aesthetics and designs and motifs that you kind of have to take advantage of and leverage. It's like the feudal Japan, as he used an example of. uh, there's certain things you look at and you're like, yeah, that is absolutely, that feels Japanese, and we want to leverage that, but at the same time, we don't want to be so historically accurate that it feels out of place in the world, and it doesn't feel as primitive as it probably should, or rudimentary. And we run into that more than a few times when we're looking at reference images or we're designing something. We're like, wait, we have to ask ourselves that question. Is this a little too advanced? Does this feel out of place? So balancing those two things at the same time can be a bit of a challenge, but it's a fun challenge at the same time. In filling in those holes and making it kind of like at the same time our own thing for this world. It is something that feels like it's part of a culture, but not historically accurate. Though we'll sometimes want to include a little bit of accuracies just because, hey, that's fun, like let's show some that we kind of know a little bit about what we're doing here.
I was going to say that one of the things that Howard has in his stories is there's this gradient from barbaric and primitive up to the decadent cultures. So everything from the Picts and Sumerians and Vanir on one end up to the Stygians and the dead cultures like the Acheronians and Atlanteans on the other end. So that's something too that we need to kind of bear in mind as we're fleshing something out in terms of making new content. Like, where on that spectrum does it sit? You know, a lot of times Ben and our 3D lead, Devo, and I are constantly harping on beat it up, make it look like it's made out of scraps. You know, it's like
Hmm.
a lot of the direction is like, this looks too clean,
Yeah.
needs to be beat up, and rough edges and stains and all that kind of stuff.
I think I have wondered a few times about the balancing act between you've got to balance the lore, what looks good in game, and something that's recognizable. I think probably a lot of Conan fans are just general history fans
Mhm.
as a whole. So I
Hmm.
think I've always wondered what the balance is like there, but yeah, I think it's probably a big balancing act to consider for you guys.
It's fun too. That's part of the fun of it. Is, at least for me, I like history, and I like digging into the different cultures and the past when we're looking to develop something new or expand on something that's already in the game, like the Iranian building set, the expansion. I know it was possibly a little divisive with some folks. Some people maybe thought we didn't hit the mark, but that in particular was, I think, really cool for the team, because we really had to kind of wrap our heads around who the Turanians were. They were descended from the Hyrcanians, who are, the nomadic steppes people, based more or less on like the Mongols or something like that. But they had settled down and become super rich. So one of the challenges there, and what we tried to do, was find a way to tie the two together. Where they were calling back to their roots with the fabric tents and the yurt kind of structures and materials, but obviously like very rich and wealthy. So that was sort of the line we were trying to walk there.
I think that actually leads me on to something I've wondered about a few times. So you've got obviously the very culture dense sets like Yamatai, Argosian, Aquilonian, stuff like that. Does it feel, I guess, kind of a bit more free to work on something like, say, Lost Dungeon that isn't necessarily tied to a specific culture?
Hmm. At least for me, it is that's always one of those things where you get, sometimes as an artist, if you're given a lot of freedom to explore things, that can be great. Sometimes that's also a little scary because a lot of people do have ideas in their head of what something should be or maybe what it should look like, and you're kind of like just throwing darts in the dark. And sometimes you hit it and people are like, oh, that looks great, your vision is great, and sometimes they're like, that's not how I imagined it. So I do enjoy the freedom, but there's a lot of pressure there when it comes to exploring something that there's not a lot of representation of. But people do generally have an idea of what they have, in their head of the way they would see it, and so you're kind of surprised, not surprised, but that does come up, and then yeah, then you have to deal with that and either sell it or work with them or something. But yeah, it can be a challenge.
Yeah, the Lost Dungeon was, I love where it ended up, but it was a rocky road to get there. It was, I think, part of the challenge with that was that it was released piecemeal, and it also was a big departure in the foundational building blocks that we uh, started with, were a departure from what people probably expected. So that's not necessarily a cultural um, departure or cultural freedom. It was more like, we were just trying to kind of do something different, start small and build on it. But as you probably know, it took a while for us to get to a point where everybody felt like the set was complete. And like I said, I think it ended up in a great place. I really like the set. Can make some really cool stuff with it, but it took a minute.
Yeah. So I suppose, simple question, moving away from the cultures, what's the favourite thing you've personally worked on in the whole time you spent at Funcom?
Why don't you go ahead?
Oh wow. I've got my hand into so many things. Like me personally drawing it. That's a good question. I particularly really enjoy. Hmm, it'd have to be maybe just some weapons. There's some weapon designs that I've really enjoyed getting into and exploring some, some of the historical versions, and then taking that and evolving it a little bit and making it a little bit different. That kind of whole process, that creative process, is very enjoyable for me. Whether I haven't really done any outfits personally or costumes yet. My time is, yeah, I usually pick up a little bit of tasks here and there, the little easier ones, and let our team handle the bigger ones. But yeah, I think there's been, I would say one of the weapons that's coming up here soon, in the next chapter is probably one of my favorites that I've worked on.
You can
So
probably
yeah,
give a hint as to what that is.
like culturally.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's Cambodian. So yeah, I really enjoyed doing a lot more research into that particular culture, what the aesthetics look like, and kind of really getting that started since we don't have a lot of representation on that. Kind of diving into that and figuring out what that aesthetic is going to look like. It was really fun in developing that weapon or weapons. Yeah.
As far as on my end, I think one of I really do enjoy working on the building sets. For me, it's fun to find a way to give the players something new and different. One recent example was with the I was going to say Corinthian, but with the Argosian expansion set. It actually did start off life as a Corinthian piece, a few Corinthian pieces, but they were kind of folded into a different package under the Bazaar, and we built around that. But the central piece that we started with was the 4-part dome um, that has the constellations and the starry sky sort of built into it. And I don't know if I haven't heard anybody talk about it too much, but there's a little magic parallax to it too, which is really cool. Um, Getting the single image to show up seamlessly on those 4 pieces was a really neat accomplishment that the team was able to pull off. Specifically, Caitlin Clow, one of our 3D artists, was able to figure that out, how to make that work with the building system, which is an extra layer of complexity. With the uh, mesh instancing and stuff that's kind of baked into that system. It always throws a wrench in our plans whenever we try to do anything new. But I think that piece in particular came out really well. The mosaic top on the top of that kind of defined the look for the additional 4 pieces and ceiling pieces that we added. And I think those came out great. It was a lot of work, a lot of back and forth, and I think Caitlin probably wanted to strangle me more than once working on that. But I really like where we ended up with those, and I think based on feedback we've been hearing, I think that the players like it as well.
Yeah, I think when I first heard there was an Argosian extension, I thought I'm open to it, but I didn't know how much Argosian needed it. But having now used it in game, I think I can't imagine Argosian not having it now. I think it's a really successful extension. I think Dennis mentioned on the fresco pieces there are I think he said the Aquilonian star signs on every other like gold block.
Mhm.
Hmm.
On that topic, are there any small details in stuff you've made that personally stand out to you that us the players might not have noticed?
I mean, the constellations, for one, we didn't have any reference when we first started developing a lot of those things, those small details. And I remember talking to Dennis and just being like, do we have anything? And he was able to track down at least the names of some constellations. And so I looked those up, but there's no visual representation. So I literally started putting some stars together and creating not only uh, star constellations, but symbols that also represented that. And try to do it at least in a style, the visual style that kind of looked like old writing for the Greek constellations as well. So that was a really fun, just kind of not only exploration process, but development as well, in order to give it a little bit more of that depth that we really wanted this to have when it came to the observatory, and that whole stargazer theme. Um, yeah, it just needed to be there. So uh, taking some time to develop that ourselves and put that in there, those little details, was I think one of the key things that really adds that depth and richness to it, but also at the same time was a lot of fun to be able to add that.
Yeah, there was a lot of background lore that went into that too that won't necessarily be apparent.
Mm.
Where we had to work with Dennis to figure out, yes, this is Argosian. The constellations are Aquilonian. Does it make sense that they would be using the same constellations? And Dennis helped us figure that out, saying yes, it does make sense. The even though the Aquilonians may be researching this, uh, that doesn't mean that the Argosians wouldn't be sharing in that. And the names of the constellations can be shared, the visuals of the constellations can be shared, and they they appear in a lot of different places, not in an overwhelming sense, but there's a lot of places in both the Corinthian pieces that were made for the previous Bazaar bundles, as well as the Argosian observatory pieces where they kind of crop up again.
I suppose then in developing visual content for the game, obviously you've said there's an intersection between visuals, the lore, and the technical. How does that process, I guess, work in sense of the whole? As a visual artist, I think most of us players would probably think you make a design, you submit the design, it gets into the game. It probably doesn't work like that. So what does that process look like?
Well, from a concept standpoint, you kind of have to have an understanding of what we can and can't do, what is appropriate and what's not, at least generally, and then we will try to do a little bit of research, get a little bit of those details of lore and stuff, and explore into that. So the first one, we don't want to box any artist in too much when it comes to that initial exploration. Uh, we like to give them a little bit of encouragement to push some boundaries, and not get married to anything. So they just explore with some sketches, and we get a first round of sketches, and then we kind of figure out, okay, well, this pushes a little, but we might be willing to accept this. This is pushing some of our, whether it's technical or aesthetic or whatever, but it's pushing maybe a little bit of what we haven't done before, pushing those lines. Um, and then maybe some of them are just way too much. Sometimes we get sketches where we're like, well, no, this is cool, but we cannot do that. That is too much. But I love to still get those sketches every now and then and some of those ideas and explorations. But they generally know where they can and can't go, at least for the most part. And then it's really free in the beginning, and then we start to go, okay, well, we like this design. I think we can actually explore this, and we start moving down that direction. And that's narrowing down this the vision, the idea, and then further developing it as well to make it a lot more refined. But yeah, it starts off really free though. Yeah, we allow them to, and we encourage it again to kind of like explore things that maybe we wouldn't normally.
Yeah, I mean, we have an MTX department who, they kind of get the ball rolling and say we want X number of bundles in the bazaar, and we want them to have these items, and we want, to explore these cultures because these cultures are more popular, very broad strokes. But then they are very hands off once it's handed off to the art team, and the concept team is very free to kind of explore, and there's a lot of back and forth communication as things are in progress. If somebody comes up with an idea that doesn't quite match what was requested from, the MTX side, we'll, uh, push back and be like, hey, we really think we should take it this direction. What do you think? And more often than not, they trust us to do that. And then the design team is very involved as well in that process, just to make sure that the implementation, um, as we're kind of coming up with new ideas, we also have to have the technical ability to implement it. So a good example of something like that is smart objects, which include interactive props, things like every chair and bed in the game now is a smart object. The, you interact with them similar to how you used to, but under the hood, there's a different system there. And it allows us to make props that you can also interact with. Like the first one we did was the Namidian library book, where you can actually go up to it and turn the pages and play custom animations. And we have a whole bunch of props like that, that we have made and are continuing to make. And that required a lot of support from technical designers on the code team to get working. But it was something that was largely sort of driven by the art team wanting to make these interactive props because they're more compelling than just a static object that you plop down in your base.
And I suppose that opens up a whole wealth of possibilities from there. Obviously, now the system's in place, I think maybe artists can push the boundaries of that, and then we end up with possibly even more compelling things. Looking back at the Age of Sorcery, I think the overall aesthetic of the Age of Sorcery is one of my favourites in general. What did that look like, bringing it from the idea of sorcery to the overall visual design element that we got?
Well, the first step was to define what culture we were kind of working with, because there's different types of sorcery in Conan. But what we ended up going with was Acheron, the Acheronians, which were at the time of Exiles were an extinct race. They were kind of a sister culture to the Stygians, but were displaced and wiped out by the Hyborians, who came down and settled what's now Aquilonia and Numidia and Ophir and Corinth and Argos and stuff. So once we had determined that, we actually had a lot of existing work to draw from, because the ruins and the unnamed city, those are all Acheronian in style. The actual like physical architectural pieces, the ruins scattered throughout the game are Acheronian. So that was a good starting point there. We had a lot of Age of Conan stuff to draw on, for Acheron. Old concept art from the previous game that we were able to kind of leverage and reuse. But really that was just a starting point, because we had to expand that into a whole, fleshed out aesthetic. Armor sets, weapons, props, etc. So a lot of that early work, in terms of defining that, was done by a couple of artists in Lisbon. Felipe and Diogo were mostly responsible for doing the early props in that kind of aesthetic, and that set the tone for what came after. And it was we did a lot of Acheronian stuff, to the point where some people on the team were like, "Can we do something other than Acheronian?" By the time we got to the end of Age of Sorcery, there were some folks that were ready to move on a little bit.
Yeah, I think focusing so laser focused on something, you can only focus on something for so long. I think I really like the Acheronian stuff, but obviously you mentioned they did a lot of Acheronian. I wonder how much gets left on the cutting room floor, for want of a better term. How much, doesn't quite make it to the game that we don't see.
Sven can probably speak to that
Mm.
better than I can.
I would say a fair amount, especially in the early stages of the exploration. Some of it should be left on the floor. Some of it, every now and then, we'll do a series of explorations. Let's just say on a prop or something or an outfit, and we're like, well, there's a couple here that are actually really cool, but we do have to choose one. Sometimes those are just left behind, but sometimes we identify and go, hey, this is actually something that we might be able to use in the future as well, and we'll like make a note of that and just put it to the side and say like this is something that we might actually be able to fit into another chapter or expansion or something of content down the road. So every now and then, not everything is completely lost and left there. We do pick up a few select pieces from that floor, but that there is a good amount. It's just kind of part of that process. But when you do have those recognizable gems, yeah, you hold on to them.
Yeah, we do make an effort to keep track of what's been worked on but not utilized, and come back to that and try to use it. A good example is you mentioned earlier the Hyrcanian Raider set that we recently released as it was a kind of a joining bonus. Should be available to everybody in the game, I believe. But that was something that we initially made, but it ended up kind of being a little bit homeless in terms of not not having a slot in the upcoming release defined for it. But it was a great piece, and so that was something that we knew we wanted to use somewhere. And when it came time, when the marketing department was like, "Hey, we want to give players something for joining up," we were like, "Hey, we got just the thing."
And then, Kris, you mentioned obviously the Acheronian ruins in the Exiled Lands. Looking at the Giant Kings specifically, I find them
Mhm.
really interesting myself. What does the process look like of sort of building a world with a nearly dead civilization in, like Civilization of the Giant Kings, but leaving enough to tell the player about the world just through visual design?
Yeah, I think it lends itself really well to a sandbox type game, because it is all about kind of exploring a more or less empty world and building, your own kind of a home in the corner of it. So, making it interesting, obviously, is a challenge. If you just fill it with content, it's not a sandbox anymore. But finding that line to walk, where you're like, where you give the player free reign to build wherever they want, and explore the game at their pace and in their way, but still providing enough context and story to make it compelling. So um, we do some of that with dungeons, because those are places where we can more specifically craft an A to B experience. Um, and set pieces, large pieces like the Unnamed City, where you have NPCs that you can interact with that can tell the pieces of the story to you. There's also tablets scattered out, like lore tablets that let you fill in the story, but it's not linear, it's not sequential. It really is about just kind of dropping pieces of the story here and there that you can then kind of stitch together and into a whole.
I think that is probably my favourite part, is stitching everything together. I actually really like the non-linear storytelling in general. Moving on to perhaps a more simple question. What's the most difficult design you've worked on?
Mm.
Mm.
The
I
Numidian
guess like
book might be up
oh,
there.
sorry.
No, go
You go
ahead.
ahead. No, I was gonna say specifically, like I'm just wondering like what defines like challenging or difficult? Is
Yeah.
it like just like subjective, like
Well,
how much of a headache it causes you, or like I'm just
yeah, it can be headache,
mm,
technical, anything, whatever you define as the most difficult.
Yeah, I was gonna say the Numidian book that I mentioned earlier is up there because it was our first smart object. Um, I don't think anybody quite realized how deep the system was going to be. We had requested interactability with this particular prop, but I think on the design side, it was recognized as a system that could be very flexible and useful for creating new content. So the decision was made to flesh it out into something larger and more robust and flexible. But that meant the implementation of that simple prop became a lot more complicated and involved a lot more developers and a lot more kind of bugs and testing. In the end, it was great because it really did give us a terrific system to work with, not only from the art side, but the design side as well in terms of implementing new content. But, just in terms of looking at that one specific object, it became a headache for a lot of people.
And that's difficult for me, but I would say some of the more difficult challenges that I've seen or been involved with have been with a lot of the building sets. And, they're good challenges, especially when we do get them solved. But introducing new pieces, figuring out where we can introduce a new piece and make it work. And not just work in one place, but maybe work in a variety of different places. That can be quite the challenge. And then along with the visuals and the aesthetics that are going on and making them work together. So you got to try a piece and like try it multiple different ways. See how does it look up against all these other pieces, and trying to figure out how to balance all that. Just you're never going to find a perfect solution, but find a good solution where everything just seems to work well. Those can be quite the challenge. There's a lot of revisions and nitpicking going on when those are developed, and reminding yourself as an artist to always put those next to other pieces as you are developing them, so you can see how they relate to each other. Because we do tend to sometimes just go, okay, got to design a wall. Here's a wall done, and then a floor done, and then you put them together, and you're like, those don't look good together. So those are a lot of things you have to consider, and a lot of things to try and test as you're developing those sets. So they can be complicated and a bit of a headache, but worth it.
Armors can be kind of the same way, where it's a modular system. Obviously, you can mix and match. Um, we don't want to, from a design standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, we don't want to be boxed into just doing reskins. We do push the boundaries of kind of what we're trying to make, but everything has to fit in that modular system. So it's like, if you wear these pants with these boots, does that introduce bugs? Do we have to redesign this? The waistline on this thing is here. Where do we cut it so that it's going to fit with the modular system? Do we put these parts on the torso or on the pants? A lot of technical questions very early on throughout the concept process before we even get to 3D have to be answered. And so it's a lot of uh, you know what if kind of thinking, like, well, what if we do this? Is that going to cause problems? I don't know. That sort of thing.
Moving from obviously the Age of War, which was very Stygian focused, to the Age of Heroes, I think at the moment, to be honest, I think people perhaps don't see as clear of a vision for what the Age of Heroes is going to be themed around as such, aside from just obviously the concept of heroes. I assume that's something that will be developed on in further chapters, but could we potentially get a taste of what we're going to see?
Well, yeah, it's not built around a specific culture in the same way that Age of Sorcery and Age of War are. It's built around characters, and those individual characters have different backgrounds. So, Freya, for instance, is an Aesir Nordheimer warrior, and Lufey is a Kitai sorcerer, imprisoned by a demon. Um, so, we're not necessarily able to tie those two characters together under a common cultural theme because they do have those different backgrounds. But the theme for the age itself is that you are finding these companions who are greater than the typical followers in Exiles. Deeper storylines, different perks, a different, longer process to convert them into followers, but also more benefits as a result.
So I think Luffy, especially, his armor design is really good, but seeing as he's a person with personality, he's more than just a blank slate thrall. To what degree does putting the character's personality into the design of their armor or their character, to what degree does that come into the whole creation process?
I would say it's very heavily influenced by that. We like to get as much information about these characters as we can. Sometimes there isn't a lot, but what we can get, we love. As artists, especially concept artists, having something to draw upon, like a target, a direction to go, is great. We love that. We love adding as much um, character, personality, background as we can into those designs. So if we can get some information on these characters, which sometimes we often get different degrees of, but with Luffy, we kind of had an idea of what his personality might be like, and then trying to represent that in the costume and the armor design, whether that's someone who looks, it could be anything from someone who's supposed to look like a peasant to someone who looks like they're royalty. And so you want to make sure that all of these like bullet points, these pillars of that target, of that character, are met, and that you are respecting those and honoring those. So it's a big part of that process. And with Luffy, we did a little bit of that, and sometimes, even though we're just creating, an outfit, we want to also kind of represent that character of that person, that individual in that outfit.
We also, another kind of preview with Luffy, we have another outfit coming up. So we had to kind of approach that in terms of analyzing his character from kind of a slightly different angle. He's got the one outfit in game, when you encounter him in the game, but then this other one, is like more of a ceremonial sort of outfit that he might have worn at the court of the Kitai emperor. And so we had to approach it through a slightly different lens and say, like, how does that affect how this outfit looks compared to his other one?
That's pretty interesting. I'm very interested to see that. I think when I saw Luffy come into the game, and obviously his armor set as well, it brought to mind that obviously there's a lot of cultures, especially like Khitan and Yamatai, that in terms of Conan's entire lifespan are probably quite old now comparatively. How does it kind of feel to be able to go back and revisit cultures that maybe haven't received as much love and be able to update them with something new and refreshed?
I mean, I love it personally. Going back and taking maybe what was established before, and even expanding upon that, giving it even more depth instead of just kind of just going and doing the same thing all over again. With any cultural reference or aesthetic, you could take something and say, yeah, you see this like commonly in this culture, but there's also all of these other things, and we want to explore those other things too, so it doesn't just become like that one trick pony thing, just being repeated over and over and over again. So it does create that opportunity to add that depth and explore further into a culture or an aesthetic. And then of course when it's ones that haven't really been touched, not just going back to the older ones, but ones that haven't really been explored at all, like it's kind of the same thing. So I personally love it.
Yeah, a good example is in the game we had Nordheimers, but that was kind of all inclusive with the Aesir and the Vanir. With the Age of War, I think it was, can't remember if it was chapter 1 or chapter 2, but we started kind of breaking those apart and fleshing out each one and finding ways to differentiate the two. The Vanir are more primitive, a little more rough around the edges, whereas the Aesir, you're more kind of standard Vikings, a little more settled and rich and polished. Still with the they definitely have that sort of pillager sort of vibe about them, but they're richer and more civilized than the Van Air. So finding ways to kind of visually differentiate them while still keeping them under the Nordheimer banner. That was something we really dug into with that chapter, and we're continuing to explore now.
Obviously, you've got some cultures like Stygia and Aquilonia that are really probably on the easier side to design for us. They've got a lot of backing and all like visual information and stuff like that. How does the process look for cultures that perhaps don't have a lot and don't have a lot in game either? So I'm thinking like Dafari, Camboosian, stuff that is really underrepresented in game but might have some backing in the literary works and such.
Well, the first step is to read Howard's work. We all of us have like a full compendium of the Howard stories, so that's our first stop. If he said anything about it, we try to dig it up and find out what it is, and that is kind of the guiding light. But beyond that, Sven can speak better to how we kind of fill in the blanks when we don't have as much info.
Yeah, I mean, what you said is really important, though. It's like doing that research. You do as much as you can, and you try to find as much information as you can. And there's a lot of times, whether it's in a story or from another source, finding those little excerpts of lore that say, you know, they did this, they lived here, they decorated their houses with this. Like if you can get those details, those really help because there's so much more out there that you probably are going to have to come up with and figure out or explore on your own. But getting those little elements and those details that are mentioned and do give us kind of like that starting point for an aesthetic are really really important. And then those of course become those pillars as well. So we want to represent as much of that as possible in there in any of those designs, and honor that lore and that work. So it's not always full of plentiful things as we were talking about, but when you can get just even a couple in there, that's uh, that's very important if we can get those and then design around that.
And as far as filling in the blanks, I mean, we once we determine kind of what cultures we want to draw on to flesh this out, we try to home in on what's appropriate in terms of time period, and then just dig into it and gather as much uh, material as we can to, like I said, fill in the blanks, and come up with something cool. A lot of times you'll look at a piece of ancient art or pottery or armor or something like that, and you're like, oh, that's awesome, we need to incorporate that.
Mhm.
Does it fit? And if the answer is yes, and it's like, okay, it's going in.
Looking at the Isle of Siptah, I think obviously there's a huge stylistic difference in the world building visually of Siptah compared to the Exiled Lands. What does the process of that look like in terms of that massive departure from the original style that the game's always kind of been based on and moving to something a bit different, a bit more eldritch, I guess?
Yeah. So I don't know how familiar you are with the lifespan of Siptah, um, but when it was first released, there was a very specific game loop um, that the entire map was built around. Um, it was subsequently changed a little bit to add more uh, camps and content that was a little more similar to the Exiled Lands, because that ended up being more what our players were looking for in terms of gameplay content. So to start out with, Siptah was built around this, uh, like I said, a very specific gameplay loop, with the tower in the center being, the centerpiece. You had to farm um, essences to power I'm gonna forget all the names of the different traps. I know the kind of developer names, but not the
The wild
um,
search things.
yeah,
Yeah.
the surge mechanic. So um, it basically the entire map was structured around that, with the tower at the center and the different the vaults built in as dungeons, but there were also the different temples sort of arrayed around the center, and that dictated the world design to a large extent. After that was kind of changed, we did a little bit of a retrofit on on the island to add more, like I said, more NPC camps and that kind of content. Um, it was finding ways to keep the aesthetic and the lore that was built in with the devolved different races and their associated vaults and stuff, and how the island was kind of split up. Um, maintaining that but adding new content. Um, we layered on an additional story of the Praxis the Bastard, I think his name was. He was a Stygian prince who sailed in to invade and besiege the Isle of Siptah. So that resulted in a large Stygian camp kind of near the center. Likewise, we had more pirates, the Black Corsairs, sailing in from the south, and the new lands were added as well. Which that was an additional layer of content that we could use to populate camps and that sort of thing.
Looking back towards building sets, I think for me, Aesir, in terms of being a two-part set, is, I'd say, probably the biggest tangible jump in quality, moving from the Stake Fort set, which was good for what it was aiming for, to the fully realised build set, which I think is top tier. What does the design process look like for taking a more partial set like that and saying, okay, we want to make it more universal and usable, and upgrading it in that way?
It's difficult because the mindset behind that is, hey, let's dip our toes in here and see, test the waters and see whether people are receptive to this, and if they are, we'll flesh it out more. The reality is, if you do something sort of halfway, it's going to inhibit that. We talked about the Lost Dungeon set earlier. The Azer set was a little bit the same way, in the sense that when it was first released, people were kind of like, "Well, what am I supposed to do with this?" Um, our understanding is always, if people like it, if people respond to it, we will add to it. We'll continue to grow it. Um, because of our development cycle, it's impossible for us to do absolutely everything. We have to kind of pick and choose. And we work with our um, monetization department to figure out how best we can spend our resources to give the players what we think they want. Um, but sometimes, like I said, we don't hit it out of the park on the first go around. Uh, I do think that the Lost Dungeon, and to a lesser extent the Azer set, were examples of that. So moving forward, we are looking, we've obviously changed our cadence to give ourselves a little bit more time to develop things, um, so that we don't have to make those hard choices like we did in the past, at least not as much. And we're looking to try to put our best foot forward from the get-go with building sets. Maybe there will still be room for improvement, but we won't have to make the kinds of um, drastic compromises that we've had to make in the past. We do have, for what we do, for what the work that we do from one release to the next, we have a pretty small team, and I think we do um, a pretty good job overall. But with the 3-month cadence between major releases and the expectation that we're packing them with full as with as much stuff as we can, it's hard. Like I said, you can't do everything, so you do have to make some hard choices here and there. Hopefully, moving forward, there, like I said, there will be less of that, and we'll be able to give players what they want from day one, rather than asking them to kindly wait until we fill that out for them. Taking a gamble on something that may look incomplete at first glance.
Initially, when the Age of Sorcery started and the process of extending older building sets began, I was kind of in half a mind as to if I wanted new sets or I wanted extensions. I think I've been sold on extensions. Extensions are really good, but I think there's so much potential of what you can extend. And how do you choose which one to extend, or is it sort of a collaborative decision? How does that work?
It's collaborative, for sure. We try to make it metrics driven, as boring as that sounds. We try to back it up with hard data. If this set is popular with players, if we add an extension, it will be popular as well. There's part of that. But then we also filter that through, the common sense lens of the design team, who are, daily in touch with players and influencers and stuff. What do they think? What are people saying? What are people asking for? Um, does it, from the art side, do we feel like we can do something compelling with it? Before we arrived at the um, Argosian Observatory set as an idea, we went through some iterations. And on the art side, we pushed back and we're like, yeah, I don't see where this is going aesthetically. I don't see what direction we can take this. And we pushed it in a direction where we're like, okay, Argosian Observatory makes sense. I think I can see what we can do with that. I can visualize where that's going to go. I think let's go that direction. So like I said, it is collaborative, multiple departments talking to each other, community also chiming in when they hear things like, hey, people are really clamoring for, an expansion to the Yamatai set or something. People really want pagodas. Let's see if we can make that happen. So it's everything kind of coming together, and as a team trying to, like I said, see if we can visualize where we're going to take it, what pieces we're going to make, what new things we're going to add to it potentially. Um, and at a certain point, taking a step back and seeing whether as a whole it feels compelling. Um, we try to add something really cool to each set so that, um, you know, players are not only buying more pieces, they're also kind of getting something different and cool that they can't necessarily get with, one of the other DLC sets or the base game sets. I think the original example of that is going back to like the Rough Timber set. We made like that market window that kind of pops up and down, and I love that thing. When we made it, I was like, this is my favorite thing in the game. Because, it was a new and different building piece with a custom animation, and it was just fun.
Probably the final question, because you've covered loads of ground. You've answered loads of questions before I even got a chance to ask them, to be fair. When you take real life things like you take the influences of Imperial Japan for Yamatai, or things like the Yarmanbu helmet for Freya's helmet reward, how do you go about sword and sorcery-ifying them, for want of a better term? What's the sort of the process of getting them into a state that's ready for the setting of Conan?
Um, I mean, there's always the question of what would these things look like in that world and not in history anymore. Um, I would say like one particular case where I was working on a weapon design, I was looking at a lot of historical weapons and the ones that are very recognizable because I want that to be part of that flavor. Um, I'll base it off from that, but then I start changing it and I start making it a little different. And you also have to consider like, okay, would they have the technology to make this particular piece or that piece? and we've got to beat this thing up. It's got to feel gritty. It's got to feel a little bit, it's not going to be pretty like this either. It's gonna be chipped and dinged, and thinking about all this weapon that you're designing, it fitting in that world. And just reworking the design and the details, and it's a lot of times the construction, because you have to think about that. Are they going to even have access to the things that they would need to build this? So a lot of times you're looking at references and going, okay, we can do this, but we're going to dumb it down. It's going to be very rudimentary. We're going to make this thing a lot more simple. So you're thinking about all these things as you're designing these props or weapons or outfits, and then just trying to make sure that it feels like it's going to go into this world.
Yeah, and I mean that is a hugely important point. Is we try to filter everything through that lens of like, could this have been made in like the Bronze Age? Um, and craftsmanship is all over the place. Some cultures, yes, other cultures, no. We have to figure out, you know, can the Vanir make this? If not, can the Aesir make it? So that's a hugely important point that we have to constantly remind ourselves of as we're reviewing concepts and figuring out how we're going to make something. And as far as the sword and sorcery aspect, um, one of the challenges that we run into and that we struggled with a bit when we were doing sorcery is Conan is not high fantasy like a lot of other sword and sorcery worlds. It's very gritty, it's very grounded. Yes, there's magic, but it's not, uh, sparkly, swirly, like magic that you might see in like a fantasy film like Lord of the Rings or something like that. Um, it is again, very gritty, very grounded, low fantasy. Um, so finding that line can be a struggle at times. We have to make sure that we're not veering too far off into kind of the high fantasy territory.
The quintessential question, as from your point of view, what is, I guess, the essence of Conan Exiles? What does Conan Exiles look like in your view?
Mm. In essence. I think some of the things that I'm always looking at is where we've just been talking about here is that grittiness. It is brutal. It is a brutal world. A lot of times I look at things and I go, does this feel brutal? Like, is it brutal enough to be Conan? There is so much going on in that world, but I always come back to those types of questions, especially that brutality. Um, so I would say some of like that grittiness and that brutality is something that I'm always thinking about. Um, you know, with of course all the different cultural influences underneath that. But yeah.
Yeah, trying to view it from the point of view of who are these people in the exiled lands. They are all prisoners, for lack of a better word, from different backgrounds. And when they're imprisoned in the exiled lands, they bring with them their knowledge. If they were a craftsman back in Argos, uh, they're going to bring their knowledge of that to the exiled lands. But the exiled lands is not necessarily their shop back home. They're not going to have the same type of tools. They're not going to have the same kind of support in terms of supplies and materials and such. So uh, everything is like Sven said, a little bit more primitive. They definitely there's a lot of high end craftsmanship. Very skilled craftsmen, but at the same time, everything is filtered through this grimy, beat up, sort of beat down lens, if that makes sense.
And there we have it, my interview with Sven and Kris of the Funcom art team. This was the first interview I've ever actually done, so it's not quite my forte just yet, but hopefully you guys got some good insight on how things work over at Funcom and what exactly goes into creating the armour, weapons, building sets and items that we use every day. Thank you for watching, and of course a massive thanks to our wonderful, esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. If you want to see videos early and support the channel directly, consider joining us over on Patreon, link in the description and pinned comment. Take care, and I'll see you soon.